Good morning, everybody. Shabbat Shalom. We're Jews, so I know that there are going to be a lot of people streaming in as we go on, but we're going to get started because there is a bar mitzvah in a little bit, which is why you're going to see me disappear in about 45 minutes, but Rabbi Lodenberg is here. Just before we get started, I like mentioning and talking a little bit about Dr. Reitman on Saturday mornings because Dr. Reitman of blessed memory, I never got to know Cyril. He passed away at 105, and I was lucky enough to know him for 5 years. And he would come to Torah study every single week and be right there on my right side. Dr. Peskin would bring him in, and I got to know him over those 5 years. And it was amazing that at 100, 101, 102, 103, 104, 105, that he just was sharp as a tack and would be the first person to read the translation out of our Torah commentary, usually the women's Torah commentary that Rabbi Person had a little thing to do with as the chief editor of it. Marcia will like that fact. It's her favorite edition. And as some of you may know, Allison used to teach her in the religious school many years ago. And she taught 4th grade because she was the youth group advisor. And she would bring the kids from her 4th grade class to meet with Dr. Reitman on that Shabbat morning after we're done with Torah study to have him talk about the history of the temple and where he met Cyril. And he'd always point to the corner of the media center, which was then Keller Hall, saying, I met her at a social. We were standing in that corner. And inevitably, especially as he reached 104, the kids would always ask, how do you get to live to be 100, 102, 103, you know? And he had the same answer every time, which was there are 3 things you need to do in order to live to 100. The first is find somebody you love and love them with all your heart. The second is find a job that you love to do and just love it every single day. And the third, because he was a cardiologist, was try to stay away from fried food. It's not good for the heart. And those were his 3 things to success. He absolutely loved coming to this lecture while he was still alive. And he'd come and sit with a wheelchair and would participate fully. And especially around this season, before the high holidays or after the high holidays, when we normally have this lecture, it's a bittersweet memory to think of him with great joy but sadness that he's also passed, but great joy that he was able to touch the synagogue in such profound ways. And he would have gotten a blast out of studying with Rabbi Person because he just loved Torah study and all types of study. Last night I spoke about how Rabbi Person is the chief executive of the CCAR, the Central Conference of American Rabbis, which is the group that Rabbi Lodenberg, myself, Rabbi Miller, all the rabbis of the synagogue have ever been members of, except for maybe the early days when we were founded in 1858.
We were founded in 1889.
Yeah, we beat you by a little. But after that moment, we've been members of the CCAR ever since its founding. I also have the great joy of saying that Rabbi Person was my first grade teacher before she became the educator of the religious school and then became a rabbi. And one of the things so I've been careful with sharing memories throughout this time because I don't want to give them all away at once. But one of the things that I have this ingrained memory of Rabbi Person was in first grade, we were studying Noah and the flood, and you introduced the song, the floody,
Yeah.
God said to Noah, there's going to be a, yeah.
Yeah.
And we were all sitting on the floor in a circle singing the song and clapping our hearts out. And to me, a teacher was somebody, especially in first grade, that would sit on the floor with you and teach you and read you stories and stuff like that. So when I came to one of my first jobs as a rabbi, or as a rabbinic intern, I was teaching kindergarten. I got on the floor with the kids, and the educator said, "You're sitting on the floor? Usually rabbis and rabbinic students don't sit on the floor." And I was like, well, if Rabbi Person could sit on the floor, then I'll sit on the floor. And that was one of those lessons that I didn't realize I was learning of, and it's always get on the kids' level and always come from where the student is rather from where you are. And that, I think, has always been the basis of you being my educator, my teacher, was always find the students where they are and help them on which is what I'm probably going to do with everybody right now as we engage in a little Torah study.
Yeah.
Not a lecture, but a conversation and dialogue for us to really pull apart our Torah and our text for the upcoming holiday. So, Rabbi Person,
Thank you. Thank you so much. Good morning, Boker Tov. Is there anything I could do to convince some of you to move closer?
We'll move closer.
Thank you. I appreciate it because I really want this to be a conversation. Before we get into the text itself, I'm going to just give a little bit of background to sort of clarify what it is we're doing, because we're not doing today's parsha. What I'm going to bring to you today is a selection that is high holiday related. So we're going to study the Akedah, the binding of Isaac, which you read on Rosh Hashanah very soon. But I'm going to read it to you from a translation that you're not familiar with. And the reason I can be assured that you're not familiar with it is because we are just in the middle of creating it right now, and we have not shared it widely. So thank you, by the way, for moving down. I'm pretty 99% sure you have not seen this translation. So let me tell you a little bit about it first, and then we'll dive into it. So at the CCAR, well, if you think about the Torah commentaries that you use when you study Torah normally here, you probably use, I don't know, and you can correct me, but you probably use what we lovingly call the Plout commentary, right? That's one of the resources. Maybe you use, that's the blue one. Maybe you use it's blue, okay, because there was once upon a, okay, good.
We use the well-formatted.
Good, thank you. I can talk about that in a minute, but you might use the green one, which is the Torah Women's Commentary. I'm seeing nods, great. And then you might use other, maybe the Altar or the Stone or the Fox. There are lots of commentaries out there and lots of translations out there. The two that come out of the Reform movement are those first two I mentioned, the blue Plout and the green Women's. And I'm very honored to be able to say that I worked on both of those. Not the original Plout, which was in my childhood, but the revised version. So let me just spend a couple of minutes talking about those and the Women's, because they're kind of the precursor to what we're about to do. So in the 70s, the Reform movement commissioned what we call the Plout, which really is called the Torah, a Modern Commentary. So Rabbi Gunther Plout was a rabbi in Toronto at Holy Blossom Temple, and he and a number of colleagues, including Dr. Bamberger, Dr. Hollow, they worked very, very, very hard with incredible brilliance on coming up with this commentary, which was the first English language commentary, the first non-Orthodox English language commentary. And what does that mean? This isn't just a denominational issue. It's really a philosophical issue, because it's really about approach to Torah study. So it was an approach that came out of Germany, came out of actually the same sort of milieu that Reform Judaism came out of in Germany, which is a sort of blending of traditional Torah scholarship and modern scholarship. Right, so if you think about Plout, it'll tell you what Rashi says about something, but it'll also tell you what archaeology can teach us about something. It'll tell you what history can teach us, what philology can teach us, right? In addition to Rashi, Rambam, and so on and so on. So it was really a revolutionary approach, and it had not been done in the English language yet. So they pioneered this work. It was groundbreaking. And it was first published in, this is a good bit of trivia here. So does anybody know how, format-wise, it was first published? Well, that's part of it. It was done by themes, not by parsha, yes. In terms of the actual printing of it. Rabbi Lautenberg, was that what you were going to say?
Yeah.
Okay.
The Hebrew is at the top of the page, and it was left to right.
Yeah.
But there was also right to left edition.
Well, let's go even further back.
Oh, okay.
But you're right.
I might be too young for this.
Yeah. Possibly, but that's okay, because we'll learn something here. Everyone will. Okay, so here's the thing. When I was like a really nerdy teenager. Shocking, I know. Right. There used to be something called Reform Judaism magazine. Remember that? Some of you probably used to get it, right? It came out of the URJ, then the UAHC. And it talked about what was going on in the movement, and there were ads. It was a glossy color magazine. And on the back cover, there was an ad for a 5-volume boxed set. You remember that? Okay, you get the gold star. Okay, so 5-volume box set, The Torah, a Modern Commentary. I went to my parents and I said, I want this for my confirmation present. That's how nerdy I was. And I have it still on my shelf. And it's a thing of beauty, right? 5 volumes, big print, thick paper. It's gorgeous. And it did not sell, right? So I think you and I may have like the only 2 copies that ever sold. So then they decided, okay, so what do you do with a set like that? You put it on your shelf and you use it, for study. But you're not going to schlep it with you to Torah study, right? And, if you're the rabbi and you're preparing the room for Torah study, you're not going to put one of those out for every, person at the table. So and you're certainly not going to put it in your pews because, right? So what they did was they smushed it all into 1 volume on very, very thin paper, right? So think about, what you're familiar with, very small print, very thin paper. By the way, anyone know what that kind of paper is called? This is another trivia question. Bible paper. It's actually a technical term in the publishing world because, we're not the only ones who use it, right? I mean, the Christians use it a lot. And, if you go to a printer and you say, we're looking to print something on Bible paper, they know exactly what you're talking about. It's a thing. Anyway, so that's how we got the 1-volume book. And as Rabbi Lautenberg said, first it was published with a red cover, and it was English opening. And then some years later, we had the 2 options, blue, Hebrew opening, red, English opening. The red went by the wayside eventually. But here's one more bit of trivia that I enjoy, which is it was never meant to be used the way we use it today. Now, I sat on the bima last night, so I didn't actually see what's happening in the pews. Do you have them in the pews? Okay. Yeah. So when we were, I'm jumping ahead a little bit, but when we did the revised edition, we literally went to about 10 different synagogues with a tape measure to make sure that what we were going to be publishing and printing could fit in the existing pews of synagogues, right? So just to give you a sense. But it was never meant to be used that way. Okay, it was meant to be used just for study. It was never meant to be used in what I would say is like a liturgical setting, right? And so it didn't have trope marks in the first version of it, right? The cantillation marks. And we're talking, a long time ago, we're talking in the early 80s. So electronic type hadn't been invented yet. We were still using I was in high school. Or college maybe, but they used something called cold type, right? Where it was literally like set by hand in these big plates. So they sent the plates to Borough Park, right, a very Orthodox section of Brooklyn, to a group of yeshiva buchers who sat and put the cantillation marks in by hand. Yeah, so that's just a fun bit of Plout trivia. But to fast forward ahead, in 2005, and I was part of it by this time, which is really my great honor, we published the revised version, which I understand is what you have here. And we reorganized it. So you pointed out it used to be organized thematically. Again, because it wasn't meant to be used for weekly Torah study in synagogues in the way that we wound up using it. So we put it into a different order. It now goes by Parsha. And, we did some other updates too, but it wasn't a radical update other than the kind of structure and format of it. 2008, we published the Torah, a women's commentary. Again, a groundbreaking publication done in collaboration with WRJ in partnership. And first time there was an entire Chumash, an entire Torah commentary written by women, only by women. And across the denominational spectrum, academics, rabbis, across the world, so the United States or North America, Israel, South America, Europe, an amazing, amazing work. And it was named the National Book Award Book of the Year in 2008, which was, amazing. And really, like I said, really groundbreaking. The first time that there was a critical mass of women scholars in the field of Bible, right? Because there certainly had been before, one here, one there, but there hadn't been an entire generation and then really a next generation of those scholars. So very proud of both of those publications, delighted that you use them when you do Torah study. But here is where we are today. We are now looking ahead into the future. So I talked about Plout. Plout was done in the 70s. Things have changed a lot since the 70s, right? Scholarship has changed. There's brand new scholarship. There are new fields of study that didn't even exist in the 70s. New archaeological findings, so many new developments. And a real sort of new approach to how we even study Torah today. So we decided that it's time that we need to create the gift to the next generation. And that is going to be a new Torah commentary from the Reform movement. So that's where we get to what we're doing here. And part of that is, as if that wasn't ambitious enough, we decided to do a new translation as well. Because, and again, I'll spare you the details because I could just talk about it forever, but the translation in the Plout and the Women's Commentary is not our translation. In other words, it's the JPS translation from the Jewish Publication Society. We adapted it with their permission in certain ways, so it's like our version of their translation, but it's not fully ours. It didn't come out of the Reform movement, which is fine. It's great. But we decided it was time, for the first time ever, to have our own translation of the whole Torah commentary, to a translation that has scholarly integrity, but is not meant for scholars. It is meant to be used the way we use it, in Torah study, in liturgical settings, in the sanctuary, in life cycles, for bar and bat mitzvahs. It's a tall order, but 4/5 of it have been translated. Now we've been working on this for a few years. The translators are Rabbis Janet and Shelley Martyr, who are in Los Altos Hills, California. They, if you're familiar with Mishkan Nefesh, the Machzor that came out of the Reform movement, right? So they did most of the translation there. They have a beautiful facility with language and, a deep understanding of Hebrew nuance and poetry. And they're working on it under the auspices of Dr. Daniel Fisher-Livney, who's a professor at HUC in Cincinnati, and Dr. Elsie Stern, who's a professor of Bible at RRC in Philadelphia. So, okay, I'm going to share with you handouts. And let me do this. Can you pass these around? Well, I forgot I'm wearing the mic. Thanks. Over there, and then here, can I ask you over here? Thank you. Hopefully there's one for everybody. Thank you very much. Okay, so we're going to be looking at Akedat Yitzchak, the binding of Isaac, and we're going to, which again, you're going to read shortly on Rosh Hashanah, and we're going to look at how the translation works, but also, of course, anything you want to share as well about the text itself. So I guess what we'll do is I'll read it, and then I'll stop, and we'll discuss. But also, I really like to hear from you, so please feel free, if you have something to say, let me know. Okay. After these events, this is what happened. God subjected Abraham to a test. God said to him, Abraham, and he said, Hineni. God said, please take your son, your only one, the one you love, Yitzchak, and go forth to the land of Moriah. Offer him up as a burnt offering there on one of the mountains that I will make known to you. Okay, so let's stop right there. There's a lot just in that section. What do you notice? Either about the meaning, about the translation, about the style? What jumps out at you? What questions do you have? Yeah. Was that a hand raise?
Yeah.
Sort of?
I mean, I was going to say it's a little more poetic.
Yeah, so, right. So the comment was, because do I have to repeat the comments back for the, okay. We're also used to Zoom world, right? Yeah, so it's arranged much more poetically. It's sort of this verse by verse style, which is very different than just the sort of straight running prose that we're used to from Plowder, the women's. Yes?
So, given where the comma is, so you're only one, if you said you're only one that you love, but you're only one, comma, becomes so two. Inconsistent.
Absolutely. Yeah, so thank you. We're going to get to that in a minute. What else? So I'll come back to it. What else? I saw another hand raised, I think. No? Yes?
Mine was just very simple.
Very simple. Yes. Okay. Anyone else on this side? Okay. So yes. So one of the things that they're trying to do in this translation is really capture the feel of the Hebrew. A lot of the times, translations become a text unto themselves, right? And especially if you're not a Hebrew reader, that's what you have. You have the translation, and it can feel like that is the text. And one of the things that they're trying to do is make the translation a little bit more see-through, so that the Hebrew really comes through, whether in sort of the syntax, the rhythm, and in this case, the simplicity of it. Because the Hebrew is very simple, and it's not always like that. I mean, there are different kinds of Hebrew, different kinds of rhythm and syntax and so on within the Hebrew text, but here it's very straightforward, very simple. It doesn't mean it's easy to understand, but it's very simple Hebrew. So they're trying to bring that forward. Now, you noted the versification of it, which is exactly right. Again, what they're trying to do is kind of take each phrase and they're not translating literally. So they're trying to translate kind of in a phrase by phrase style. Here's what the phrase as a whole is saying. Here's the feel of it. Also, they're trying to, again, sort of capture the rhythm of the Hebrew. And so doing it in this kind of verse format lets the rhythm come through more clearly. Now, you raised a real content point about please take your son, your only one, the one you love. So that's really complicated because, of course, we know that there is another son, right? So one of the amazing things that they've done in doing this translation is create an incredible resource of translation notes, which I'm hoping that we're going to publish, not within the commentary itself, because it will be this big, but as its own, a standalone publication. But so they write about this, your only one. So, anytime you go to translate, you're doing commentary, right? There's no such thing as like straight translation. You're always making decisions. So just to give you like some insight into their thinking. So they write, JPS, which is the more standard translation that you're familiar with, translates Yechidcha, right, which here they're translating as your only one. JPS translates it as your favored one, right? So that may be the translation you're more familiar with. And it makes sense in a way because we know he has another son. So if you're differentiating between the two, you can't say your only one, you have to say the one you like better, right? Or like, your favored one. But Alter, another translator, writes, some scholars, bothered by the technical inaccuracy of the term only, have followed an ancient reading of Yedid, favored one, instead of the Masoretic Yechid. In other words, what he's pointing out, so, think about how ancient the Torah text is, right? And the fact that it was copied by hand, right? Generation after generation after generation. And we actually don't have what scholars refer to as the Or text, like the very first version. We just don't. We don't know where it is. We don't have it. It's probably, doesn't exist, right? So what we have is generations of scribes copying it. And there are a lot of words that are very close together in, one letter off, and it might not even be a letter. It's like one little part of a letter. So if you miss, the little line right there, but you have the rest of it, it changes the sound of the word. It changes the meaning of the word. So the word yachid and the word yadid and yahid are very close, both in sound but also in the way they're written. And maybe there's a scribal error in there that crept in over time. Or a scribal, not even error, but a scribal change, right? So it could be favored, it could be only, and that's what Alter is referring to. But then what he goes on to say is this conversation about whether it's Yechid or Yedid misses the point that in regard to Abraham's feelings, Isaac, right, which is the only son he has with Sarah, is essentially in his heart his only son, right? So, and it kind of comes back as a refrain at the end of the verse, which we probably won't get to, but it's there. So thus, the translation of Yechidcha as your only one has particular power. Now, this is them speaking, not Alter, suggesting both Yitzhak's preeminent place in Abraham's heart and the sense that Yishmael, the other son, right, has been displaced and marginalized. Yitzhak is the only one who matters in terms of the line of Abraham. And that's really the way the narrative is pointing us, right? He is the son who matters in terms of the ultimate trajectory of the text. I'm not making a political point here. I'm just saying, in terms of the way the text itself is working. Then they also point out that there's a sort of assonance and a rhythm of the English that they've created in here. So your son, your only one, the one you love, just sort of hear that, right, which echoes the way the Hebrew works. So it reflects the Hebrew sound pattern with a pervasive ah sound of the vowels, of like the kamatz and the patach, those are both the ah vowels, right? Kach, na, bincha, yechidcha, asher, ahavta, yitzchak, lecha, moria. Like, do you hear that sort of, that rhythm, right? So they're trying to do the same thing. Now, they don't have the same words to use, the same vowels to use, but they're trying to do your son, your only one, the one you love. They're trying to the extent that they can, echo that, that rhythm. So that's just a little bit, perhaps, to answer your question, but it also gives us a lot to work with as students of Torah. Well, what does it mean, his favored one or his only one? What does that mean vis-a-vis the bigger family structure? What does that mean in terms of the Jewish people, right? So it just provides us with lots of questions, which is the meat of Torah study. What about the names? What's going on with the names? This is not a trick question. Yes?
Abraham instead of Abraham, Yitzchak instead of Isaac. So you have to keep the name
Yep.
transliterated as opposed to the English version of that name.
Yep.
And
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. So this was an experiment, but it very much part of the sort of preferred philosophy of the translators and really of all of us working on it. Again, it goes to this idea of making the Hebrew really come through the English more. And it's a teaching tool too. Like, right, so, we should know that actually the text says Abraham. The text doesn't say Abraham. Abraham is a much later, gloss on the text. Like, as English speakers, we're familiar with Abraham, we're familiar with Isaac, but those aren't actually their names, right? Their names are Yitzchak, Abraham, etc. And we really weren't sure how people were going to respond to this, because it's a little jarring. I mean, I think it's a little jarring. Also, like Moriah as opposed to Moriah or something, right? Yeah. Yeah.
I was curious about the names because I'm sure this is the same similar intention that Andy said Hineni.
Yeah, exactly.
Instead of just saying I'm here.
Right.
Because Hineni is a word that we use a lot in our movement, I would say.
Yeah.
To in a way of saying, that is referred to as Hineni, not,
Right. Right.
I don't know how to phrase it.
Yeah. So I'm going to get to those in a minute. Just
It's a way of making that word familiar.
exactly. Yeah. So hold that thought, and we're going to come back to that. So with the name, so we piloted a few of the texts, some sample texts last November in about 90 congregations, and we wanted to see what people were going to say about the names. And interestingly, people said that at first it was jarring, and it sort of took them a little bit to adjust to it, but then they really liked it because they felt that they actually could connect better with the text, and really they felt that educationally it was really important, and it added to to that sort of trying to see the Hebrew through the English. So I think we're probably going to keep the Hebrew names like that, but let me know later if you have another thought on that. And then, as you pointed out, there are also the words. Like there are sort of key words that you're going to see first put in transliteration, like Hineni, in the English text, and then in the brackets there will be a translation, right? So we don't want people to feel alienated, like I don't know what that means. That wouldn't be nice or inclusive. But the idea is that there is a body of sort of key words that, as you said, like we use in Jewish life, and so Hineni might be one. Of course, I'm blanking on what others might be, but there are going to be, just not a lot, but certain keywords that through the text we're going to see the Hebrew version of it, not just the translation of it. Why? Because these are these sort of key Hebrew concept words. Right, Hineni is such a central word, concept, this idea, and we'll talk in a minute about what it actually, how we translate it, what it means. But so that's another attempt at trying to sort of bring the Hebrew text forward out of English. Yes?
I'm also struck by the word sacrifices, burn up. That's a pretty savage word.
Yeah.
Not that what was intended wasn't fairly savage, but to have it expressed that way in the text
Yeah.
is remarkable.
Yeah. And what do you think it works? Do you think it's too
Well, I'm coming at it slightly differently.
Yeah.
This is simple language.
Yeah.
And it's not necessarily poetic. That's not the way the scroll is written. But after these events, this is what happens. There's a ton of events that happen before that add enormous value, volume,
Mhm.
complexity to the story.
Yeah.
That the simple language and things like this push away some.
Yeah, interesting. Thank you. There's a whole body of work around how you translate the sacrificial words. And, there are like lists out there of like, this kind is translated this way and this, and they're all pretty technical. And what they're trying to do here is get away from the technical sense and really have it be, as you said, like very direct. And so, the Hebrew word is olah, which literally means like the thing that goes up. And so, that's why you see this idea of like burnt up. It's both. It's a burnt thing that goes up, and so they're saying burnt up. Like they want it to really have meaning for us beyond the kind of technical terminology, right? So olah is a sacrificial offering that is completely consumed. So in that sort of list of what all the different offerings are, because they each have different valences to them, right? This is the one that's completely burnt. And, right, it's an act of like pure giving. When you make an olah sacrifice, the whole thing goes up to God, so to speak. So, and the person who brings it gets nothing from it. Because a lot of the sacrifices actually were a way for the community to have meat to eat, right? Because you offer the sacrifice, but then you basically have a barbecue. And in this case, that's not what the Olah is. So they are really purposely using that very kind of direct language, burnt up, like it's all gone and it goes up. So they're trying to get both of those things in there. Yes?
Yeah, the way this is arranged on the page,
Yeah.
and to your comment about rhythm, I think it adds a lot, at least me, to the drama
Yes.
of the passage. God said, please take your son, your only, the one you love, Yitzhak. If you read that linearly,
Mm-hmm.
in a linear fashion, it may not come across that way. It may not see those pauses, breaks
Right.
that give the tremendous force to this particular sentence, this particular verse.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly right. Thank you. Yeah. Yes.
I am not very knowledgeable about these things, and I was under the impression that some parts of the Bible were written as sentences, one after the other, but without punctuation, and some were written as poetry.
Yes. Well, that's right. So there is no punctuation at all in Torah.
So I'm
But-
wondering if this was originally written in the poetry form and therefore reflected in the poetry form in the English, or was it written
Right.
in the
Yeah.
words one after the other without
Yeah.
punctuation?
No, that's a great question. So this is not written poetically, but it is being translated that way. Yeah. But you're right. There are some sections of Torah that are written in a more poetic form. Yeah. But no punctuation anywhere, which makes it really interesting and fun to try to get the meaning, because sometimes punctuation makes a big difference, right? Okay. All right. Anything else before I read a little bit more with you? Okay. So Abraham arose early at break of day, saddled his donkey, took his 2 servant boys with him, and his son Yitzchak, split the wood for the burnt up offering, and set out straightway, walking to the place that God had made known to him. All right. Any thoughts, questions about any of that? Yes.
Straight away,
Yeah. Yeah. So
bothersome. It's bothersome.
it's bothersome because it feels too common or too British.
It doesn't seem to meld
Okay.
with the other vocabulary.
Oh, interesting. Okay. Okay. So here's what they wrote about it. So they wrote literally rose and went. Spicer, who's another, so what they're doing when they translate is they're looking at tons of other translations and scholarship, as well as Jewish, the classical commentators, to try to tease the meaning out of it. So they wrote, Spicer, a sort of 20th century translator, scholar, translates started out for, and writes that when so construed with another verb, the Hebrew presents a hendiasis in which lakum, to get up, indicates the start or speed of action. Similarly, in a resource which I think is Hebrew and Aramaic language of the Old Testament, it's sort of like the dictionary of people working in Bible, writes that the verb lakum, when used with another verb, is frequently just added as an illustration of an event. The present translation conveys the notion of starting immediately with set out straight away, and includes walking because of the repeated refrain of walking and walking together, which we see in the verses to come. So that's why and how they made that choice, but I completely hear what you're saying, that it doesn't feel consonant with the rest of it. Other thoughts about any of these verses that we just read? Yes?
Gives you a visual that you can relate to break of day, and was Abraham waking up early. Like you can imagine that, you can see that.
Yeah, yeah, right. And what else does straight away give us, even if it's not in their notes? What kind of sense does it give us? Yeah. Urgency. Yeah, exactly. Right. I mean, this is often used in Jewish tradition as an example, this little section right here, about how when you are called to do a mitzvah, you have to go do it right away. Right? It's zariz l'mitzvah, like you don't wait. So, and this is sort of the example, like Abraham was asked to do this by God, and he like got up and went and did it as soon as, it was light out. So that's why, for example, like Brit Milah is typically, if you can schedule it, done first thing in the morning, right? I mean, in today's world, we're not always, when Moyles are doing 5 or 6 a day, you can't always schedule it like that. But historically, this is why, because like you got to do it right away. Yes. Okay, yeah. So that's a right. Yes, right. Yeah, that's an interesting point. But this kind of illuminates that. Yeah. Okay, I'm going to read. Yes.
Very beginning phrase after these events.
Yeah. Mm. Yep.
Where Abraham bargained
Yep.
on behalf of some people.
Yep.
But for his own son, okay, whatever.
Right. 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 That's a very good point. Right. Yeah. Right. Right. Well, right. I mean, I always think that really begs the question of like, did Abraham know it wasn't going to go through? Right? Because also, don't forget that Abraham was promised by God descendants, as all the stars in the sky. And how could that be if Isaac is killed? So, that's one of the things I always think about every year at Rosh Hashanah when I have to give a sermon about the Akedah. Like, did Abraham somehow really understand? Did he have enough faith in God that he really understood that God wasn't going to have him go through with it? Yeah.
My Muslim student told me that it wasn't Yitzhak who was the favorite son. It
Yeah.
was Ishmael.
Right. Right.
So in that case, it was perfectly okay to sacrifice.
Yeah, well, right. So, we do share some of these stories with the Muslim tradition, and we read the stories differently. Yeah. I mean, that is the truth. So, I mean, it's fascinating, actually, how we own stories. Like, we think, this is our story. We read it a certain way. It has tremendous meaning for us as Jews. But guess what? It's not only our story. And other people read it in other ways. And that's really helpful to remember that. Thank you. Yes.
That's what I was trying to say.
Okay.
Look at the earlier verse. Abraham wrestling with the carrot.
Mm-hmm.
The children.
Yeah.
And it says here, God said to him, Abraham, and God said, take your son. Abraham, Ishmael. And it says, the only one. Oh, that's Ishmael is the one.
Yeah.
So on. And then the one you love, Ishmael. And God said, don't tell me, I mean Yitzhak.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
That's where Abraham was coming from.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's a great midrash on it. Absolutely. Yes.
So your point about Abram was going on along, you say, well, God is omnipotent, so if God's really seeing it, man, look, is doing this, this is a big fluff, and God says, well, I'm actually going to go ahead. See, Abraham, joke around.
Yeah.
I may do something horrific. I don't know, it just gets a little goofy to me to say, well, wink, wink, nod, nod. Yeah, go sacrifice your son. But, really, we're going to do a ram.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's letting God off too easily, or letting Abraham off too easily.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I always felt like he really thought it.
Yeah.
And it's just implicit in it. Then you can make the argument, why didn't he put it back?
Yeah.
Really? You want me to kill my son?
Right.
What kind of God are you?
Yeah. Right. Well, there's another midrash that goes. I mean, it's sort of similar to what you were just saying, but it goes like where there's actually a dialogue, but the other half of the dialogue's not in the text. But like, so God said, actually, this is interesting too, because God said, right. So they use the word please, right, which is really a fascinating word. Now, the Hebrew is na, which actually means please. I mean, it's a word that is a request word. And it's so fascinating that God would say that. Like, why is God actually making a request, right? It's not a command. Most of the time, God speaks in commands, right? And this is not a command, right? So, it's really striking that God addresses Abraham in this way. And it's used in other biblical texts also to mean please, to have that sense of a request. It's kind of polite, which also, like, why does God have to be polite with Abraham? And it softens the command. I mean, it softens what might otherwise be a command, right? So there is kind of agency on Abraham's part because he does go along with it. If someone says please, you could say no, thank you, right, or whatever, or no. Right. I mean, it's a fascinating word in there, and because it's almost like if you wouldn't mind, right, I'd be so obliged if, right, if you would go and sacrifice your son, right. So I'll get to you in 1 second. So there's kind of this. So God says, "Please take your son," right, and then if you can insert Abraham saying, "Well, what do you mean?" And then God says, "Your only one." And then Abraham says, "Well, but what do you mean? Like, I have two." And then God says, "The one you love." And Abraham says, "But I love them both," right? And then God says, "Yitzchak." So, right, that's just midrashic, right? It's not in the text. But there is like an inherent struggle there in the text. Yes, and then I'll get to you. Right.
The test is, first off, to say, I'm here, I'm in class today.
Yes.
Here's the paper.
Right. Call on me.
Filling it out.
Right. Right.
Start to stop, and read to the bottom. I'm not doing that. I'm going right to the bottom.
Yeah.
So the test part means it suggests that there needs to be some volitionary, forks in the road.
Yeah.
That either will lead to or not.
Mm-hmm.
The way thing at the very bottom, that could be a subtle reference to the women's commentary, like go straight away. Like Sarah, how did Sarah was practice? Oh, your class today, right?
Right.
And he walked. Alexander walked away. He didn't run away.
Right.
So there could be kind of a reflection of the fact that he put out.
Yes. Right. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you. You had a.
Well, I think I was going to say what David said. I was going to say that if, in fact, the test, being commanded to do something and deciding not to obey it is not, or deciding to obey it, is not really a test if you feel that you have no choice but to obey
Right.
what God asked.
Right.
So it's asked in such a manner that gives him a way to accept or not accept.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, right. Like, when God says please to you, can you really say no?
Exactly.
Yeah.
But if God says please, then like you say no thanks. But that's the test. So do it nicely versus when it's important.
Yeah. Yeah. Yes.
One of the things I love about the Torah, very terse,
Yes.
very complete. This discussion shows that. Can your translation carry such a...
Oh, thank you.
In that sense, I say Torah is very modest.
So ambiguous. Right. I mean, imagine if it was less ambiguous, we probably wouldn't still be studying it because, it just wouldn't have the depth and the richness to it. Right. Yeah. Okay. Should we read just a little bit more? Oh, we're almost at time. Okay, really quickly, just a little bit more. On the third day, Abraham lifted his gaze and saw the place from afar. Abraham said to his servant boys, "You stay here with the donkey, but the boy and I will walk up there, bow down in devotion, and come back to you." Then Abraham took the wood for the burnt-up offering, placed it on his son Yitzchak, and took in his own hand the firestone and the cleaver. The two of them walked on together. Well, let's talk for a minute about the word boy. There's a lot of, when we talk about ambiguity, there's a lot of ambiguity about how old Isaac was. Because, as the rabbis try to parse it out and make meaning of it, there are like three different options that they come up with. And it has to do with like counting how many, what age Abraham was when this happened and what age he was when that happened, and sort of trying to count it out like that. So one possibility is that he was 3. But that would be one kind of a story, right? Like somebody who's completely unable to fight back or to say no or to refute, right? Another is that he was 13, right? And probably that comes from rabbinic sense of like 13 and bar mitzvah, but, great coming of age ritual. Really good for the father-son relationship. And another is that he was, I think it's 33 or 37, do you know? 37, thank you. So all three of those options imply really different kinds of behaviors on the part of Yitzchak. Do you want to? No, right, youth, right, exactly. So, and you got to make a choice when you're translating it. So, and they went with boy, but yeah. Yes, exactly. Yeah. So what's interesting about na'ar is that it could be an age designation, youth, lad, boy, but not like young boy. But it can also be a status designation, right? So it could be like, servant, retainer, personal attendant, sort of any of those kinds of things. So, so first we have it in line 3, right? He took his 2 servant boys, Nar. And then we see it again, here later. The boy and I will walk up. Oh, no, we see it in 5, actually, in both places in 5, right? So it's an interesting juxtaposition of Na'ar and Na'ar, right? But it gives us a lot of ambiguity about his age, right? Because, your son is always going to be your son no matter how old he is, right? He's always going to be younger than you, but it could be, a son could be any age. Whereas a Na'ar could be within an age range, but still not that specific, whereas Yeled would be more specific, child, right? And it doesn't say that. Yes?
If I remember correctly, Rabbi Nolan many years ago suggested it's not a town tree.
Oh.
That would be consistent the way he functions the big part. Here, to do with the place of
Interesting, yeah. Well, one of the things that whether he did or didn't, that's speculation, midrash, which is fascinating. But what we do know just from the text is that he wasn't a super forceful personality, right? He's kind of passive. Here he goes along with his father and with God. Later, a wife is brought to him. He doesn't go out and find his own wife. His main occupation is redigging his father's wells, right? He's not, and that's sort of a metaphor, right? He doesn't go out and dig his own wells. He doesn't really move the story forward in a very significant way, except that he adds to the family line, right? He gets married, he has children, which is kind of his, in terms of the purpose of the narrative, his main job. And he does it. But he is like this cipher in between his father and his son or sons, right? They're super active, have tons of agency in the text, do a lot of things. And he is this kind of passive character who just doesn't do a whole lot. Yes, I'll get to you and then back to you.
It says that Isaac was blessed, basically everything that he did.
Yeah.
But he really didn't have to be an active character.
Yeah.
Because he had the calling cards.
Yeah. Right. Yeah.
I'm struck by the use of the word servant boy.
Yeah.
Because the text says, yes, and this one says that witness with, that's a big job.
Yeah.
We didn't have actors back then. It was
Mm.
PR. So doing that task, Abraham did that himself. Does the use of servant boy suggested that the servant was younger and not physically able to participate fully,
Mm.
in the whole ordeal, sort of packing up monkey, getting everything ready to go over here, go on for this mountain.
Maybe. I mean, that's interesting. I hadn't thought about that, but that's interesting. I mean, but the thing about Na'ar is that it could be, it could be like strapping young men, who have the power to carry a lot of wood and, do a lot of the tasks. So, yeah, I don't know. That's interesting. But we definitely get a sense of Abraham as being like incredibly active here, right? Doing all the things that have to be done. And the main task of these servant boys is really to wait with the donkey. Yeah, so it's an interesting question. Yes, you, and then I'll get to you. And then I think we have to end. Yeah. Yes, also, that is also true. And that is reflected in our commentaries as well, throughout Jewish tradition, that this sense that he was really scarred by this experience, sort of deeply psychologically scarred, and can't really ever get over the trauma of it. That is definitely one interpretation. Yeah. Thank you. Yes. You, and you're going to be the last. Okay.
You were talking about just off the stage, speculation around that. The fact that this particular sentence uses are in reference to both the servant boys and to Isaac.
Yeah.
Might indicate that at least in Abraham's eyes, talking to the servant boys, he's almost saying Yitzchak is adjacent with respect to
Yeah.
your strength.
Yeah.
I just found that interesting. The same word used.
Yeah, that is interesting. That is interesting. Yeah, thank you. Yes.
I'm just curious about the line, based on the discussion, to bow down in devotion to come back here. So it doesn't imply that the son is not coming back.
Yeah. Well, it's ambiguous, right? Because it could be that only he comes back. It could be that they both come back, and in fact, they don't both come back, right? Because one of the things that the text tells, not to like give away the story, but they go off their separate directions, which also kind of goes back to what you were saying, like and the text never has them meet up again. Now, we can fill in with midrash, but just if we're looking at like the plain reading of the text, they never meet up again. And so what does that tell us too? They have this experience, and then they go off in totally different directions and live their own lives. So yeah, I mean, it gives us more questions than it answers, but I'm going to have to stop there because we've gone over our time. But thank you so much. Wow, you were so participatory, and I'm really grateful for that. Thank you. This was great, and I hope that you will get further opportunities to play with this translation and with the commentary in the next few years as we work on getting it done. Thank you.
I want to say thank you again. And I guarantee that when we have the commentary, we will spend time with it, you and me. And because I'm really excited about it. And I was skeptical, I'm going to be honest, but I'm really excited about it. And me skeptical about a new thing, who knew? And thank you. I'm glad that got one laugh. I want to say thank you so much, and I want to remind everyone that we are not done learning with Rabbi Person. We will be back together at 12:30 for lunch and learning in the Media Center, where there will be lunch, and we're so excited to be back with you very soon.
Thank you.
See you in a few hours,
Great.
everybody.
Thank you. We're going to study poetry related to this text.